Hey guys, it's Michael here. This is going to be Healers or Resto Shaman's commentary on the 25th January patch notes, bringing some massive changes to 3 Mythic Plus dungeons, the Necrotic Wake, Depths and Plaguefall, as well as the raid bosses of Council of Blood, Legion Generals and Sludgefist. These changes will specifically target Mythic as well. Please guys remember to like, sub and comment to let me know what you think about those changes. And we can obviously discuss that in the comments. And also, I do stream on twitch.tv/MikeFeel, link is over there. And that's it, guys. Let's begin. Okay, guys, we'll start with the Necrotic Wake, because I think this is probably the biggest change there is. And I'm a bit surprised, because, like, as a healer anyway, I felt like this dungeon was okay. I would just put it, like, somewhere in between the hardest and the easiest ones. It's obviously not as easy as Mists of Tyrannicide, but at the very same time, this dungeon was relatively manageable. So I'm kind of surprised by these changes specifically. Like, some of them are just quality of life, such as, you know, the current armaments that just do not disappear now. They persist through death, which is very important because actually this means that if your Pag allies just mess up somewhere along the way, you can still just complete all the encounters as planned, which I think is just very, very good stuff. It was very annoying to have your Javelin or the Anima disappear previously, right? So that's actually good stuff. However, there are like some other changes, like significantly decreasing the difficulty and maybe just kind of lift those precision requirements. Because let's face it, like Necrotic Wake was relatively manageable of a dungeon. It did require a lot of precision though in terms of interrupts. So it's good for classes like Paladins, like Holy Paladins, who do not have that many interrupts in their arsenal. Because this means that you can probably just kind of make it through even if your team isn't exactly interrupting enough. So we'll just have a look at all those things over here. So starting with the Brittlebone Crossbowmen and Brittlebone Warriors, their damage was reduced. Not a big deal because they were not that dangerous anyway. But if we go down the line, guys, the Brittlebone Mages, the volley, which was shredding on higher difficulties, you know, this actually also includes the Amarth boss who was summoning those mages. Those skeletons are also actually nerfed quite a bit. So, you know, altogether it's kind of a large change because this was probably like the biggest source of damage in the entire Amarth encounter. Like, if you would actually let 2 of those volleys go through on plus 16, plus 17, your team would probably just wipe instantaneously. It was very difficult to heal that anyway. So this is actually going to mean also the cast time is increased, which means that those volleys will no longer be casting for 2.5 seconds. Like, full second actually means that you can fit in an additional interrupt if needed, which is just great. So that's a very large change. And we actually go into another huge one. So Corpse Harvesters and Collectors. Those guys were using the Drain Fluids ability, which was actually it was an incapacitate for 4 seconds. It was doing massive damage, and they would target healers very frequently. So this being gone, this being just removed from the equation is actually just ridiculously huge. There's a massive, one of those monsters is like a massive AoE ability as well, which is also going to kind of go away because you can focus them down very easily right now because they have 30% HP less, which means they are not a problem anymore, which is huge, right? This is absolutely massive change. Now, I think another very important bit here is that Kyrian Stitchwork also had its HP and damage reduced, both by a respectable number. And this is the monster that reduces the armor on the tank. So it will just shred the tank significantly over time, meaning that the tank will just eventually drop dead because, you know, you can only take so many stacks of that. There are like some ways of, you know, tone swapping that monster just so that the tank could, you know, lose the debuff that it was applying. But it was still a very significant challenge. I think it was kind of sometimes locking out people who didn't have enough DPS to just burst through it before, you know, that it could apply like 3 or more stacks. So this is out of the picture, and I think you can easily just kill it very fast. Also, the damage is reduced, which means that even if it applies like some additional stacks of the debuff, it is still going to be manageable for you, which is absolutely great. Moving forward, also this big Necromancer, which you say right after the first boss encounter, like the one that casts those huge green balls on the ground, he's also gone. So like he's gonna have less HP, which means you can just spike him down, take him out relatively fast, and this is great stuff, right? This overall just means that the entire dungeon is going to be relatively easier. I really don't think this is necessary actually, but those changes have gone through or will go through today or tomorrow depending on your region. So that's also it's gonna help you just kind of, you know, complete this keystone higher difficulty. So, you know, if you go high enough, this will probably be irrelevant because you will just kind of meet the previous difficulty at some point at like plus. It probably just kind of changes like the keystone by 2-3 levels, but there are like some additional mechanical changes here as well. So first of all, the carrion worms have to bite you 5 times, not 3 times, to deal this massive AoE DOT across the board. So this is actually gone. So 5 bites is enough for any pag, I think, to eliminate those worms anyway. So that's not going to be a big problem anyhow. So anymore, this is just going to be a pretty decent of a change. Moreover, again, like the Amarath is going to be nerfed. Like all those summons that he has have been nerfed alongside the regular versions of those monsters, which is also huge. And Unholy Frenzy attack speed is reduced, which I don't really think that is that huge overall, because it's just damage on the tank, which was easily healable before. And finally, guys, Surgeon Stitchflesh actually has his Embalming Ichor, so this kind of huge DOT field that he leaves, like that, you know, players have to drop on the ground, reduced to 1 minute duration from 6, which means that actually, if your teammates mess up initially and drop those Ichors at wrong locations, they can still be recovered, right? So you can kind of still reclaim that positioning in the fight, which is big because people don't pay attention to this. It's actually quite annoying when the middle of the arena, or where you probably will be willing to fight the boss, is just occupied by those massive AoEs that you cannot enter. So I think that's kind of a big change after all. I don't know if this was necessary. I think this was like the entire intricacy of the fight, just kind of dropping those Ichors. It takes away the precision factor to some extent, dumbs the fight down a little bit. But the hook mechanic is already quite annoying. The fixation is there, so I think that may be a good change. I don't know. I don't think, honestly, if I really don't feel like most of those changes are necessary for the Necrotic Wake. I would say the only thing I'd love to see is that Kyrian Stitchwork just kind of goes, I guess I kind of tuned down a little bit, because that was just legitimately a DPS check that you don't have to pass anymore, which is good. I think this is good because it's not about gear, it's about precision now. It's about just kind of your team doing the right thing. But overall, you know, those changes probably for the better. Now we're gonna go up to another dungeon, and the next change actually concerns Plaguefall. And this is, the first one is the Plague One Devoted, whose health and damage is reduced by 40%. I'm not sure if this works with the monsters that are just out there from the start of the dungeon, or whether this just modifies the mobs that are spawned by the boss. So those are like the super slow moving zombies that basically one-shot people when they kind of get into melee with you. And I really think this is like a lot of intricacy of the fight that's just gone with this. I'm not really sure if this was necessarily the right approach, maybe reducing the HP, but keeping the damage would have been okay, but just 40% damage less means there, you know, no more one-shots in that fight, which significantly reduces the difficulty of the encounter, which is, I think, a very difficult but interesting fight nonetheless. So I'm not really sure if this is the right approach, Blizzard, but, you know, be my guess, I guess. Moving forward, though, the reduced frequency of infectious rain during the final phase, is actually reasonable, I think, on those higher difficulties, especially on Tyrannical. Infectious rain was actually a huge problem. It was like a massive obstacle. It was shredding people left and right, and if you have no off healers, and if people are not paying attention, if they're not removing those diseases as well, because it applies a very large DOT as well, it is a very, very frightening ability. You probably have to burst like a major cooldown per cast, and this means that you would prefer for the number of those casts to be like slightly lower than it is, which, you know, is reduced for the final phase only, which means you still have to make it to the final phase, and you still have to survive it, but, you know, still quite nice. Now, they adjusted the timing of Plague Crash. I think this is okay, because, to be honest, the slower moving classes were sometimes having trouble just reaching the right place, especially if the tentacles just kind of go around, like, you know, they keep slapping around the circle arena, then it actually was very dangerous, I think, for paladins or for death knights, because they have like longer cooldowns on those movement abilities, and they were not always able to just kind of avoid those tentacles. So I think this is okay, actually. This should probably make it kind of a fair playing ground for all the classes, including those who have like no additional mobility included and do not have like covenant abilities that would facilitate that mobility. So this is pretty cool, actually. It's kind of some quality of life. And that's basically it for Plaguefall. Now we're gonna go into Sanguine Depths, and Sanguine Depths actually have some very minor changes to the trash, but the big changes are coming to the first two bosses. And again, I think this is directly related to Tyrannical affix, because Severing Smash would very frequently just one-shot your team, and, you know, it basically, like, every single time it's cast, it spawns like a ball of energy from every player, and those balls just slowly move towards the boss, and they have to be soaked. If you don't soak those balls, they will, you know, heal the boss, but if you do soak them, they deal AoE damage across your team. So it's very important that you actually, first of all, soak them, but then you cannot soak them all at the same time, because it just will demolish your HP bars of your team, right? So you have to make sure that you pop some sort of a defensive before, and during the tyrannical Crixus, this fight will probably last a bit longer. So we have like at least 3 or 4 Severing Smashes, and this actually means that, you know, you have to be ready to, you know, heal through all this very dangerous overlaps, because he will very frequently just charge right after as well, which does massive amounts of damage in the AoE, because it has to be another like soakable ability, which means you really don't have that much time to heal the Severing Smashes. It was a huge kind of skill check, HPS check as well, so you had to like heal your team for massive amounts of HP and have like a very specific timing ready for Severing Smash. And Essence Absorption, I think, is not a big deal, actually. But I do feel that Severing Smash change will make this boss significantly easier. Now, Executor Tarvold, again, spawns a Fleeting Manifestation, which does AoE damage across the board to your entire team until it's killed. Again, very decent change, I think, because it was like a huge bother when you would miss out like it required like a lot of accuracy here. So like this very slight reduction by 20% of the HP on this summon means that you may survive even if your team messes up slightly. So I think this is okay. Also, like, Sanguine Depths are really difficult as a dungeon. I think they're like the most difficult dungeon there is, easily. So I think any changes to that dungeon are actually quite welcome. So I believe that's a very, very big change altogether. Now, Spires of Ascension. It's kind of a minor change, but those are very annoying mini bosses. So I think it's reasonable they actually are nerfing them a little bit. So the deal is those are the 3 angels that you fight right before Deva's fight. And they each have like a very large debuff that they apply. And not only do they apply that debuff, when one of them dies, like the other 2 will inherit the debuff at the same time. So basically you're supposed, so the debuff comes for like Hessus, which is the mob that applies a stacking damage, increased damage taken debuff to all the enemies. And he does this, you know, on a second-to-second basis. It applies like it increases the scaling of the damage by 1%, which means that, you know, over time it will accumulate like a massive debuff, and you would be taking like a lot of damage from the 3rd one. Like I think you would be killing Klotos last, because he has the Aura of Intimidation, which actually delivers like a lot of damage across the board and takes down your team, right? So this means like the stack of Oppression and the Aura of Intimidation was massive. It was doing so much damage. It was very difficult to heal for some people. It was probably like the hardest encounter in the entire dungeon for that reason. Like fighting the final one would very often draw the Bloodlust even, right? Because it was just so much damage coming through. It was very difficult to deal with that. So this change just addresses that particular issue, and I think it will probably mean that debuff is going to be significantly lower than before. So it's kind of a good change altogether. I think that's not that bad at all. And out of the dungeon changes, I think this is it. However, there's like another change I think is like specifically related to MDI, where they're basically making it impossible to diminish the aggro of Manifestation of Pride when it spawns, which was usually just done by melding, right, using the racial of the elves, of the night elves, during the MDI. So it's no longer possible to ignore this, which probably should mean that, you know, we can play some other classes that are not using the night elf race, because that was basically the core thing that we saw in the MDI now, where everyone was playing the night elf classes, right, because they could just shadow meld and ignore the aggro, which is no longer going to be a possibility, which is great, I think, because it just should add some extra variety. We might see some shamans, some paladin healers, which is absolutely great, right? So I think this is pretty good altogether. It should make it a bit more manageable. Let's go into the boss. So as far as the bosses go, guys, we'll be looking at the Council of Blood, Sludgefist, and Snow Legion Generals. I personally didn't get to those bosses yet on my Mythic run. We have 4 out of 10, so it's going to be quite a long path ahead of us, I think. However, let's just kind of have a look at what happens here. So first of all, the Dreadbolt Volley, which is interruptible, by the way, has its damage reduced, which I really don't understand, because when you have like 20 people in the raid, like pressing an interrupt is not a problem. Drain Essence has damage reduced, which is, I guess, okay again, but it's not that big of a deal, I guess. And finally, the last change is quite big. So the Dark Recital has its duration reduced to 6 seconds from 7 on Heroic and Normal. And this was the ability that kind of drops those AoE pools on the ground. You have to kind of just move as a unit to avoid taking the damage from. And I think like 6 seconds means that you just have like a extra breathing room where you don't reach the wall. You can actually, maybe you don't even have to take the turn then, like, because you usually have to run towards the wall and turn right or turn left. You don't have to do this anymore. So this might mean that it's kind of easier. Like this extra second might mean it's kind of easier not to die there, because this is basically the ability that kills everyone. I think like the only hard bit of the entire Council of Blood fight on heroic at least and normal is that recite those. So it's no longer going to be a big issue, which means, a little bit easier for the healers to heal through that. Now, a lot of changes for Sludgefist, like in terms of damage, and this is a timed fight. It's like multiple healing checks in it, as well, as far as I know. So I've been watching some other healers healing this on Mythic, and those are changes specifically applying to Mythic. So all those kind of high damaging abilities, like the Colossal Roar, which hit you for like 80% of your max HP, maybe 70, is now reduced by 10%. A lot of damage just kind of is gone now. Chain Bleed, Chain Slam reduced as well, so this means like a lot less healing load altogether on those boss fights. It's kind of good stuff, right? It's going to make make it like a bit less demanding in terms of precision, which I think is okay, because this fight would probably take 100-something attempts at least to complete on Mythic, which is now not going to be the case at all. Now, Stone Legion Generals are very difficult to unpack, because that's a massively complicated fight with lots of phases, lots of intricacies as well. So what I'm just going to point out to, because I'm not going to go in depth into this would take hours to unpack if you were to kind of go in depth, like why these things are happening. And I really don't have the expertise to do this, because I have not done this fight on Mythic yet. So we'll just kind of very briefly state what's happening here. So first of all, the cooldowns are going to be resetting with phase changes, which will prevent the overlaps, which are quite nasty in this fight as far as I saw during the World First Race. So this is just going to be going out of the window. We will not have to time the phases or phase changes so narrowly to actually avoid some nasty overlaps happening, and that's kind of good. Then the Goliath HP is reduced as well, like the Skirmisher HP is reduced, which means that obviously it's just going to be easier to take them down, so the fight will just get a bit faster. Maybe you can burn them before they do some nasty abilities as well, which is obviously great. And the damage of the bosses is also going to go down quite a bit, so I think that's overall, like, all those changes will probably be a little bit more manageable, I guess, right? It's going to be a little bit more manageable altogether. So it's a very complicated fight, as I said, probably the hardest one in the raid. So it's good that they're probably making it a bit more accessible, especially that people will want to reach the Nathrias at some point. And that was probably like the biggest roadblock for them to do so. It was, yeah, so I think that's kind of good. They might be bringing this on par with the Nathrias Mythic difficulty fight as well. Guys, finally PvP changes, which are kind of big actually, especially if you're running healers into V2s, because dampening will start at 20%, which means your healing efficiency and your shields will be like a bit weaker. And actually this means that, bursting through a healer and a DPS will be easier for double DPS team comps. So I think that's actually quite a decent change, unless you're a healer, which is the case here. So not too happy myself, but I can understand where they are coming from. Like, probably they're trying to make the fights a bit faster, and instead of just kind of dragging them out into forever. Now the next bit is that the minions of Death Knights, Hunters, and Warlocks will actually have a bit higher HP pool, relative HP pool, because the damage they take is going to be reduced by 20%. So that's going to make them a bit more resilient. And there are like some major changes to 3 classes. So first of all, the Druids will also take a big hit to Convoke the Spirit, which is one-shotting people. So I think like we're all very happy to see Full Moon crits go away, where they were like, obliterating people, just one-shotting or two-shotting them. I'm really happy that this one is gone. Now, Paladins will be like the Holy Pally's Talent Divine Favor, which was this very quick cast. So this ability was basically like an activatable skill that incurred no global cooldown, and it would actually just allow you to cast your Holy Light very fast and at increased efficiency, and made it uninterruptible as well. So this one is going to go on a higher cooldown from 25 seconds to 30. Is also going to give you less cast speed at the same time. So I think it's kind of a good change altogether, right? Because that was like a massive amount of healing that this ability was providing. Now, Protection and Retribution, Paladins will also heal less with Word of Glory. I think that's mostly because they just kind of didn't see how much it could potentially, how much healing people could be doing with extra large amounts of versatility, right? Which is stacked by a lot of PvP players, because, let's face it, that's the kind of the PvP meta. You're supposed to stack like shitloads of versatility because it reduces the damage you take, increases your healing, and also scales with the PvP trinkets. So like, I think that was just kind of the problem. Like, the Retribution Paladins were healing like healers. So, and the same goes for Protection Paladins, right? So that one is off the table and it's no longer going to be a big issue. And finally, mages actually had a nerf to the Infernal Cascade Conduit, which was the combustion ability, like added skill to combustion, like added extra fire damage to combustion for every single cast of Fire Blast, which is kind of a decent change because it was just a bit less. It was just kind of a bit overwhelming when they were kind of activating the combustion. And finally, the Triune Ward, which is the legendary that gives you shields. It has like a slightly lesser barrier effectiveness, right? So 15% nerf, making mages a bit less resilient on the other hand, which I think again is a decent change because mages were like particularly obnoxious in PvP. So they probably still will be this. Those changes are not massive by any means. I think they'll still be like actually quite okay. I think the biggest changes here are obviously that the dampening is here now for 2v2s. Which is fine by me because I mostly play 3v3s, and also the druids are nerfed, so no more one-shots, which I think everyone will appreciate, right? Because like as a paladin PvP player, I was just kind of usually, when I saw Convoke the Spirits, I would just pop my Babel and just pray that, you know, that basically is that. So I think that this is a very good change, because this had like 0 counterplay, let's face it, right? So this is actually quite a decent change altogether. And guys, that's gonna be it for today, I think. So if you did enjoy the video, please remember to follow me on Twitch, drop me a like, and also subscribe to the channel, and tell me what you think about those changes. Tell me what you think about my commentary on them, and yeah, see you in the next episode.